engineering.
Interceptor fabrication templates installed and ready for...
As often as we're getting new properties in the 2020s, entertainment companies are seemingly even more eager to reboot and revive older franchises from the 90s and 2000s, if not even older, hoping that the existing audience investment will lead to a solid return. However, for every rare success story that results from resurrecting a dead series, it seems like there are a dozen utterly failed attempts that end up losing millions of dollars. The lesson to be learned from these failures is clear. If you're going to bring back a classic franchise with a numbered sequel no less, you just can't half-ass it.
Intelligence Officer Paktu.
Sir?
Consider this briefing to be under the Sunrise on Carrick protocols. There will be no more communication from Igara, and you are to remain calm silent until mission completion.
Acknowledged.
We are in the middle of an unfolding crisis. No matter what you may have heard, I assure you, it's worse.
Homeworld is a real-time strategy series from the very early aughts that introduced the novel idea of fully three-dimensional space to the genre. Rather than the two-dimensional plane of the ground or really any terrestrial restriction, the game's battlefields are massive outer space stages with tons of verticality and maneuverability. While the original game was met with slightly mixed reception at the time for being rather slow and complicated, players quickly identified it as a cult classic in the making, particularly with its grand galaxy-spanning journey of a story and exceptional atmosphere, no pun intended, and it eventually became the most critically beloved PC game of 1999. The series has been dormant for nearly 20 years, minus a few remasters, because of a chain of rights shakeups. Developer Blackbird Interactive's bringing it back with a partially crowdfunded third entry after such a long time places a heavy expectation on the game. It has to update enough of the gameplay to be accessible and intuitive for modern players while keeping the soul of the old titles intact, and I'm happy to say it succeeds. This review is entirely based on the single-player campaign of Homeworld 3, which picks up 100 years after the end of the previous game. The mothership Kar-Kushan and its navigator Karen Sajet have been missing for a century, but still, time and technology have marched on, and the galaxy is now connected by a system of massive gate transporters that make it easy to travel vast distances. However, this gate system is being threatened by a mysterious force known as the Anomaly, which, if left unchecked, will almost certainly dominate the entire galaxy. Now the series' newest navigator, Imogen Sajet, and a brand new mothership will have to embark on a journey across the stars in order to combat this threat before it becomes too powerful to resist. It's all a fairly standard space opera storyline, but as the plot is my only real criticism against the game, I'll get that out of the way now. While Homeworld 3 is immersive enough to keep me fully invested, I took a step back after I finished the story and realized it's just not particularly deep. Two major themes are repeatedly mentioned and pointed out, and they do come together in the end, but there's also a tiny cast that doesn't really develop or change in any way throughout the narrative outside of an ordinary main character starts nervous but becomes confident progression. Imogen is just not a particularly memorable character, and the game tells an adequate but ultimately forgettable galaxy in peril tale without many surprising twists. That's mostly the product of hindsight though, because the game is captivating enough in motion to stop you from thinking too hard about it. Compared to the bombastic John Williams score that forms the foundation of dogfights in Star Wars, Homeworld leans much more towards portraying the quiet beauty of space. There is music in the game, but it's largely very well-placed tracks that enhance the ambiance of serenity in between fights. It gets more intense as you enter combat, but all of it is designed to emphasize the spectacle of outer space and the massive ruins you often traverse with your armada. I highly recommend headphones and a big monitor for this one.
Probe launching. Probe ready. Probe is away.
Standing by.
Alert, strike craft losses mounting.
The gameplay is modernized in all of the right ways. A decent medium ground has been reached that lets the player command their fleet either totally freeform with the use of the movement disc system, or genre-typical point-to-click movement that enables you to choose a solid point for your armada to congregate. Between click and drag selection, positional group selection, and a drop-down menu that lets you give orders to every unit from a specific class at once, Homeworld 3 makes it easier than ever to conduct your growing fleet like a well-tuned orchestra. There's even a dedicated shortcut that lets you select your entire offensive armada at once if you're ready to launch an all-out assault. That being said, prepare for the game to test your understanding of unit distribution and weaknesses, as Homeworld 3 also carries on the series' tradition of being punishingly difficult as time goes on. It didn't really hit until around the second half, but once it did, the enemy was handing me my butt on a silver platter regularly enough to force me down to easy difficulty, and the final mission goes hard enough even on easy to make me nervously save scum. I completed the game, but the hit to my pride was definitely a high cost, as I generally try to review all of my games on the medium difficulty level. I did find that some units also fell off rather hard in terms of usability as the enemy fleet started to crank up the heat. The smaller strikecraft units are probably more helpful in multiplayer modes where players work with finite resources and more big-brained tactics, but by the end of the campaign, the enemy is throwing so many massive ships at you that my strikecraft units tended to just get annihilated before any real damage had been done. It seems like Homeworld 3 wants to keep these units relevant, as every few levels it allowed me to upgrade their health pool, but the cap on how many I was allowed to have kept them from being really helpful. The challenge I described at the beginning of this review is capably met by Homeworld 3, even if its story felt a little simplistic. Its lightweight tale did not stop me from being captivated by its depiction of the endless, beautiful void of space. The frustrating, difficult-to-master control scheme has been both modernized and preserved for those who crave the classic experience. It's easily beautiful and satisfying enough to meet the standards of classic players and entice a brand new crowd of interstellar heroes. Noisy Pixel is giving Homeworld 3 an 8.5 out of 10. Thanks for watching. This video is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. Noisy Pixel is run by a group of gamers providing independent gaming coverage through news, reviews, previews, and more. Check out our Patreon to help support our continued growth, and subscribe to keep up with all of our future content.
Noisy Pixel.